All right, I'm going to begin. My name is Chris Buckley, and I oversee public outreach for the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study. Um, we are here tonight to share some information about some revised alternatives, some refined, rather, alternatives. So we are happy to have you all, and let's go to the next slide.
Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. At this point, I would like to kindly ask you all to please select a language of your choice, English or Spanish. You can do so by clicking on the interpretation icon that is at the bottom of your screen. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Hola, bienvenidos. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Tenemos interpretación en español disponible para ustedes. Solamente tienen que hacer clic en el icono que se encuentra abajo de su pantalla y seleccionen español. Para escuchar solo el idioma interpretado, haga clic en Mute Original Audio para silenciar el audio original. Gracias.
Great, thank you, Nancy. So this night is very important. The meeting is very important for us. We really want to make sure we hear from you. We want you to respect the format of the meeting, make sure we treat others with respect. All of the comments should be addressed to the panelists, and we'll manage that. I'll talk to you about that in just a moment, but we'll manage that in a couple of ways. And this is a conversation, right? We're sharing information with you, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. And we're very interested in your questions and comments. Next slide. So this is a little bit more about how to participate. If you're joining us through the web, go ahead and if you have a question or a comment, you can click on the raise hand, which you'll see down at the bottom of your screen. You can type comments in the Q&A section, and we're just using the Q&A section for comments and questions. We are not using the chat. The chat is it's one way, and it's for us to share information directly with you. When you do raise your hand, or you'll be asked your name and organization, if any, of course. When you put a question in or a comment in the Q&A, if you could also add your name and organization, that would be great. If you're giving verbal comments when announced, please unmute your audio, and then you can go ahead and make your comment or ask your question. And then once you're finished, you'll be remuted. If you're coming in by phone, calling in, you would press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand, and you'll be announced by the last 4 digits of your phone number. So we'll be using the last 4 digits to indicate who we're calling on. You can press *6 to unmute your audio, and then you'll be remuted once your comment is completed. Next. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca, the project manager for the study, and she'll talk a little bit about our agenda and move us into the full presentation.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everybody. Here on the screen, it's our agenda for the day. As you can see here, Chris has talked through the meeting purpose, and so now this kind of shows what we're going to go through today. That consists of the alternative concept development process, the evaluation and scoring process and results for those 3 categories of concepts that we have talked about previously, as well as how all of that ultimately feeds into the refined range of alternative concepts that we are recommending to be carried forward for further analysis, followed by a Q&A session at the end, as well as some quick next steps and schedule. Next slide, please. So for our meeting purpose here today, again, the focus is on the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study, the short to midterm solutions. Specifically, we are requesting your comment and input feedback on the 1 to 3 shortlisted concepts per category that I mentioned, that refined range of alternative concepts that we are recommending to be carried forward for further evaluation. Just a quick recap, because there's a few different efforts related to all of this that have gone on. So just to be clear, very quickly, there has been a series of emergency rail projects that have taken place in the very recent past. You can see there on the far left-hand column there that kind of gives a brief snapshot of what that looks like. Essentially, these were reactions to emergency needs for the rail line down there to stabilize it. And from there, we have developed a coastal rail stabilization priority project. This is for those 4 reinforcement areas that are at imminent threat of further erosion and then that would ultimately impact the railroad. So those are those 4 area projects. And then we have here the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study, which focuses on the larger sort of 7-mile segment of the corridor. And then ultimately, following the conclusion of this study, there will be a long-term solution study that will ultimately be led by the state. The beginning of that is still TBD. So at this time, we are focusing on what we can do in that midterm up to 30 years to stabilize and protect the railroad in place, while the state explores those longer term solutions to keep the railroad in place for the longer period after that. Next slide, please. So for our alternative concept development process, again, we're at the evaluation of those concepts. And so you may recall, for those of you that participated at the last series of public meetings, we had a larger list of several different concepts that were broken down by category and typical section. You can see that it was broken down by, we had rail concepts. Those are concepts that had to do with the rail infrastructure itself. We have bluff-side concepts that address the landward side of the tracks, landslides, rock slides, and the like. And then we had beachside concepts that address the seaward side of the tracks, that coastal erosion, the ocean getting closer to the rail line. And so what we have since done is we have taken all of those that big menu of various concepts, and we have put it through an evaluation process that basically produced scoring for these different concepts that ultimately landed us at these 1 to 3 shortlisted concepts per each of those 3 categories recommended for further study, which is where we are today, and which is where we're requesting your input and your feedback on that. Next slide, please. So again, just a quick recap. We did hold a couple of public meetings earlier this year in the summer. We had an in-person meeting held on July 15th at San Clemente City Hall, as well as a virtual meeting via Zoom on July 29th. There is when we shared that information about all of those, all of the concepts, and we had a total of 150 participants between the two. There were 63 participants at the in-person meeting and then 87 participants at the virtual meeting. Next slide, please. And here, this kind of summarizes the overall sort of gist of the feedback that we received. As you can see here, there was strong support for sand nourishment, as well as the lot of emphasis on the importance of the restoration and the preservation of safe, continuous access to our beaches and coastal trails, as well as some concerns shared about shoreline protection structures. That would be like your rock revetments, your seawalls and riprap, what have you. And so in response to those comments, what we have since done that we included as part of our evaluation process that we'll talk more about here shortly, is we added a one-time sand nourishment to all of the shoreline protection structure concepts in the beach side sort of category to help buffer the rail corridor and support those community benefits, as well as included a sand only concept for evaluation for comparison against the other beachside concepts that we have as well. Next slide, please. And here, this is just a quick snapshot of the various stakeholders that we've been working very closely with over the course of this process. As you can see, there's several different stakeholders varying from local, state, and federal entities. And so we have worked very closely with each of these stakeholders, as well as held various meetings and workshops as we have kind of worked through this process and developed our evaluation and scoring process as well. Next slide, please. And so here I'm going to hand it off to George, who will talk through the evaluation and screening criteria.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we'll dive into our screening criteria. We categorized by different evaluation topics. So we had 5 evaluation topics, and there were multiple sub elements within each of these evaluation topics. So I'll start off with the coastal resilience and rail reliability. Under this category, we were looking at service disruptions as you are trying to maintain that particular alternative, looking at its sensitivities to storm surge, taking into account sea level rise and beach erosion, as well as its longevity. We're looking at that 30-year design life in order to then be able to at least withstand until a long-term concept is going to come into play, as well as the track resilience in relations to the bluff erosion. That concept, that category received a weighting of 25%. The next category was implementability and constructability. So we are looking at the impacts to adjacent right-of-way, what kind of requirements there are. Is it, just temporary to construction or permanent requirements? The schedule and speed of implementation of that particular concept, looking at minimizing impacts during construction, and then just overall constructability and its ability to fully meet the design criteria. And so that category also received a weighting of 25%. The third category was cost, and we looked at construction, maintenance, and then overall life cycle costs for each of the concepts, and that was a 20% weighting. The fourth category was for public assets and environmental impacts. So we are looking at impacts to public facilities. There are utilities that are adjacent to the right-of-way to the rail line. We looked at impacts to grade crossings. There are multiple pedestrian grade crossings in the area, as well as some vehicular crossings. Also looking at impacts to surfing, swimming, or the multi-use paths that are adjacent to the railroad here in the 7-mile stretch. We also took into account pedestrian access to the beach and overall coastal access. Looking at regulatory permitting as well, and its impacts to sensitive habitats, as well as Section 4F resources. And that received a weighting of 20%. And our last category was the related or other planned projects in the area. We wanted to make sure that we are in alignment with other local, state, and federal projects that are being planned, either in the area or adjacent to. And so we're looking at how well does that concept support, and align with those projects, as well as other initiatives by other agencies that are trying to address coastal erosion in this stretch. So as each of these alternative concepts was refined, we took them through each of these categories and assigned a score that would then in turn be weighted according to the weights that are mentioned here on the top. Next slide. And before my colleague Avi dives into each of the alternative concepts, this is just a reminder of the typical sections that we divided up this entire 7-mile stretch. It is included in the handout that you just saw right now, my colleague post on the chat box there. So we have 7 typical sections. They are all color coded here along the rail line. If you continue to the next slide, this will be the second half of the stretch all the way down to the county line. Avi, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, George. So I'm going to go through the scoring results for the 3 categories of concepts that were evaluated. I'm going to start with the rail concepts. So we had 3 concepts here. The first one, to recap, was to raise the track embankment, finding opportunities to elevate the track embankment. And that could really only be implemented at the south end of the alignment, and really only a marginal amount of the track bed could be elevated there. The second item was alternative materials for critical railroad infrastructure to reduce life cycle costs. So that included changing materials for items like signal houses and other critical railroad assets to be less corrosive in the marine environment here in the coastal zone. This was a low-cost concept to help lower overall life cycle costs on critical rail assets. And then the last one here is the ground improvements or track bed stabilization. And that could include methods such as deep soil mixing or check routing. And this helps address drainage issues at the track and lowers maintenance costs. It can provide some benefits to the bluffs as well. So as you can see, the 2 concepts that we're carrying forward are the alternative materials for the critical railroad infrastructure and the ground improvement. Next, we're going to kind of take a deeper dive into the scoring results here for the rail concepts. So these scores are out of a total maximum score of 120. As you can see, the elevated tracks, raised track embankment scored fairly low. There's a high cost and construction impact that exceeded the benefit compared to the other concepts. The other 2 concepts, the alternative materials for critical railroad infrastructure and ground improvement, scored quite high and are being carried forward. For the alternative materials, it will limit the impacts to surrounding communities and environmental assets, and it's the easiest to implement and is feasible. The ground improvements has the best influence on railroad resiliency. It may have some minor impacts during construction. The other advantage is it can be combined with bluffside ground improvements to further stabilize the area. Next, we're going to discuss the bluffside concepts. And here we had 9 concepts. So I'll quickly recap these. First one was the catchment wall. The intent there is to block slide debris. This is a proven solution that's been implemented along the coastal rail corridor. It's cost effective, it provides rail resilience, and can be implemented without impacting railroad operations. Second one was stabilization grading, which was buttressing any sort of landslide at the toe. This one's more difficult to implement within the railroad right-of-way. It could have major cost impacts to private properties, and also it's difficult to clear environmentally and have permits in place. The third one was the tiebacks/soil or pin pile walls, and this is intended to mitigate larger potential landslides. Again, this is a proven solution that's been implemented along the coastal rail corridor that provides a strong resilience to the railroad, but it may require some right-of-way acquisition. Number 4 was the ground improvement bluff stabilization, just similar to the concept we just discussed at the track bed, using methods such as check routing and deep soil mixing. This may be only applicable in some areas of the coastal rail corridor, may be difficult to environmentally clear and permit. However, it is being considered for just the track railroad right-of-way. We have surface matting and deep-rooted vegetation planting. The intent here is to reduce the sediment erosion that we see happening on some of the bluffs. This solution is really only applicable in some areas of the coastal rail corridor. And it could be implemented with other alternatives. However, we don't feel it provides adequate resilience as a standalone concept. The drainage improvements via grading, detention basins, or under-track outlets. This is a solution that's applicable in only some areas of the coastal rail corridor. This too can be implemented in combination with other alternatives, but doesn't provide adequate resilience as a standalone concept. Deflection walls and tributaries. This is to reduce flood and sedimentation flow rates. This is generally outside of the railroad right-of-way and does not provide significant resilience to the railroad. And it would likely need to be implemented by others. Upgrading cutoff drains. This is to reduce the overall source of water that we're seeing in this area. Again, this would be outside of the railroad right-of-way, and it doesn't provide significant resilience to the railroad, and again, implemented by others. And lastly, hydro augers, which is intended to lower the hydrostatic pressure in the bluff and lower the landslide potential. Again, this would occur outside of the right-of-way and would be difficult to permit and construct on private properties. Next, we're going to dive into some of the detailed scoring results here. And as you can see, the two solutions that we're carrying forward are the catchment walls and the tieback/soil nail pin pile walls. Catchment walls, again, a proven cost-effective approach within the right-of-way. We touched on some of the other reasonings, but I want to highlight for the tiebacks as well. Again, a proven cost-effective approach, and it's mostly within the railroad right-of-way to protect our tracks without requiring long-term maintenance. As to the other items that we're not carrying forward for the stabilization grading, that's going to be difficult to construct and it impacts adjacent properties. The ground improvement is only recommended to be considered with the combination of rail improvements related to bluff stabilization. The surface matting would be relatively easy to implement, but only for specific areas, and it's not considered a corridor-wide solution. However, it can be implemented with others. The drainage improvements via grading is only recommended in specific areas, but not a corridor-wide solution. The deflection walls and tributaries scored at 84. It supports some of the project goals, but must be implemented by other agencies and will take years to naturally replenish beach sand. The upgrading cutoff drains only recommended in specific areas outside of the right-of-way, but is not considered a corridor-wide solution. And finally, the hydro augers is difficult to construct. It could be impactful in residential neighborhoods, and it also extends beyond the right-of-way. Next, we're going to move to the beachside concepts. As you can see, we had several beachside concepts with some variations of some of the concepts, which I'll highlight here. So to quickly recap, the first solution we considered was a beach nourishment with planned replenishment by others. Then we had the beach nourishment with riprap shoreline protection structure. So what you'll see here is we evaluated several different types of shoreline protection structures. 2.1 was with riprap. 2.2 was beach nourishment with engineered rock revetment. 2.3 was beach nourishment with the seawall shoreline protection structure, and 2.4 is beach nourishment with the combination of a seawall and rock shoreline protection. Moving on to number 3 was beach nourishment with sand retention measures, and no shoreline protection structure. So some of those sand retention measures could include artificial reefs, breakwaters, jetties, to name a few. And the sand retention would be a measure to help keep the sand in place, but the sand alone doesn't provide enough of a last line of defense for the railroad. And moving on to number 4, here we're kind of summarizing all 3, which is the beach nourishment, sand retention measure, and some sort of shoreline protection structure. Again, evaluating riprap, engineered rock revetment, seawall, and a hybrid solution of seawall with rock shore protection. And finally, the watershed modifications, which would increase beach sand supply, but likely be implemented by others. Here we're going to carry forward 2.1, 2.3, and 2.4. On the next slide, we'll get into some of the detailed scoring, and I can provide some of the reasoning here. Next slide, please. So looking at the beach nourishment with no shoreline protection structure, this was not carried forward due to the scale, which is the lead time to procure the sand, permitting, the funding needed, and sand quantity needed is a large undertaking, and it the concept cannot maintain a 30-year design life given the unpredictability of sand movement during storms or king tide events. And the sand alone does not provide a sufficient last line of defense for the railroad. Looking at 2.1, which is one of the concepts we're carrying forward, which scored well, which was the beach nourishment riprap shoreline protection structure. This is a proven solution that can be constructed within the railroad right-of-way while also improving beach access when combined with the sand placement. The beach nourishment with engineered rock revetment structure scored well. However, we considered it difficult to construct due to most of the study area of the corridor would have significant impacts on railroad operations during construction. 2.3, which is the beach nourishment with seawall shoreline protection structure, was carried forward as well. We believe this is a feasible solution that can be constructed within the railroad right-of-way while improving beach access when combined with sand placement. And then finally, the beach nourishment with hybrid shoreline protection structure, again, I believe it's a feasible solution that can be constructed within the right-of-way. It provides a last line of defense for the railroad and helps improve beach access when combined with the sand placement. As for the beach nourishment with sand retention measures, that was not carried forward. We believe it can have some negative impacts on recreational users such as surfing and swimming. And it can be difficult to receive environmental approval and permitting. With the number 4 alternative concepts, this is the beach nourishment with sand retention measure and shoreline protection structures. In all of these, it would be negative impacts towards recreational users, such as surfing, swimming, difficult to receive environmental approval and permitting, and some of the sand retention measures are still unproven in terms of performance. And finally, the watershed modification to increase beach sand supply was not carried forward. This would be a solution that would be implemented by other agencies, and it would take years to naturally replenish the beach sand. With that, I think, Rebecca, will hand it back to you to summarize.
Thank you, Abhi. So yes, to summarize what we just reviewed here, the 2 rail concepts that will be carried forward for further study and analysis are the alternative materials for critical railroad infrastructure to reduce life cycle costs, ground improvement for that track bed stabilization. The 2 bluffside concepts that we are recommending to be carried forward are the catchment walls, as well as the tieback / soil nail / pin pile walls. And then the 3 beachside concepts to be carried forward include the beach nourishment with riprap shoreline protection structure, the beach nourishment with seawall shoreline protection structure, as well as the beach nourishment with a combination of the prior 2, possible engineer rock revetment, or any of those combination thereof. Next slide, please. Okay, and now we will hand it off to Chris to begin the Q&A session.
Thanks, Rebecca. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we really do want to hear from you. This is our Q&A session, but obviously, please remember, provide comments as well. Again, a couple of ways to submit your comments and questions. If again you're doing this via the web, you can provide verbal comments. Just click on raise hand, and ultimately we'll call on you. You can type your comment or question into the Q&A function. Just click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please again include your contact information. When we call on you, unmute your audio, and then you can ask your question or make your comment. And you'll be remuted once your comment's complete. By phone, *9 on your keypad to raise hand. We will call you out by your last 4 digits of your phone number. And then *6 to unmute your audio. And then again, we'll be remuted once you complete your comment. And just as a reminder, the chat is just being used by us to share information out to you. So with that, let's begin. Nancy, do we want to move to the next slide, or do we want to have what we have done is put a 3-minute time limit on comments and questions for those who want to provide verbal. So just a heads up about that. But I'm going to start with the Q&A at this point. Brian Yanity is asking, will the PDF of this presentation be available online? The answer is yes. The session itself is being recorded, and we will be posting that information, the recording of the session and the PDF in next day or two. So see that on there. Tony has a comment. Tony Nelson from Capo Cares. You are calling your 30-year plan short term. It's short to midterm. Do you have studies to support your belief that this line has 30 more years of possible life? We've had considerable erosion along the San Clemente segment in just the last few years. This doesn't seem plausible. Rebecca, I'm not sure if that's a question you want to take or another member of the team.
I think it should go to one of the technical members of the team, George.
Yeah, I'll take that. So when we were looking at the types of alternatives to consider, and as we took them through the evaluation criteria, one of the things that we wanted to make sure each of these alternatives would consider is a 30-year life in order to get us at least to the point to where any of the longer term solutions that would potentially be studied in the long-term study that the state will be leading. So kind of bridging that gap. So as of right now, the refined alternative concepts that were presented here are meeting that 30-year design life criteria.
Thanks, George. Much appreciated. Stephen McVeigh has a question. Did the beach nourishment options that we explored include only initial, quote, single shot nourishment with the other structures up front for the project life? Or did you consider need for ongoing beach sand nourishment over the 30-year period? George, is that you again?
Only looking at a one-time sand placement.
Thank you, sir. And then Ray Harju has a question. When the plan stabilizes, what will Sandy Beach in North Beach look like? Will it be like it is now, or more sand than we have now, less? I'm gonna say that at this point, what you're seeing going on at North Beach is part of one of the emergency projects. And we've put an initial placement of sand there, I think about 2,500 cubic yards, maybe a little bit less than that. And we are, as part of the emergency projects, we have 4 of them, but the sort of the 3 main ones that have been either completed or are working on, which is working on the rock repair, riprap repair and replacement. That's been completed in 2 locations. And then we're currently working on the bridge on the catchment wall that will be that will also, the results of that will incorporate the bridge. It's not going to be a bridge. It's going to be a recreation of the trail there. So that work's being done on an emergency basis under emergency permits, and we'll be adding another 240,000 or so cubic yards of sand at that location. That's separate from the study. The study is looking at, up to the next 10 to 30 years. We do have a website for that, by the way, if you want to go to octa.net/rail emergency, I believe it is. I don't see any additional questions. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Lisa Gant says this is very vague. How wide, how high, how long will these seawalls and boulders be? How far will you intrude into the sandy beach, or will you stay within the rail right of way at State Beach? Those are a couple of great questions. George, do you want to handle that?
Yeah, I'll ask if Russ could unmute, Russ Bedreau from our team, and he'll take on this question.
So, yeah, very good question, by the way. We are just in the process of identifying the alternatives to carry forward, and so we don't really know yet the length of the shore protection required, nor the kind of the length and the volumes of the beach nourishment to achieve the goals of the project. So these studies will soon be underway to identify that, and the results will come out, through the feasibility study. We will be looking at beach nourishment at 3 different locations, at kind of like the north end at the area 1 and 2 that's been identified, area 4, and then down towards Cypress Shore as well. And we will do computer modeling to predict how that initial nourishment will move along the shoreline and how those beach widths evolve along the shoreline. And we're also considering, we'll look at those standalone, but we'll also be evaluating, there are other projects ongoing as well that can work together. For example, the Corps of Engineers has their 250,000 cubic yards placed in the vicinity of the pier, every 6 years or so. So we will include an evaluation of that and how that may work, basically to kind of work with the nourishment we're placing at different areas, because we're placing the rock, the sand more in areas where the Corps of Engineers is not. And plus, just again, considering in the future other studies to also look at beach sand placement as well, including the Sandag Regional Beach Sand 3 project, which is still in its initial stages. Nothing's been refined yet, nor any funding been identified, but we'll consider the overall context of how the beach nourishment will evolve within this 10 to 30 year period.
Thanks, Russ. I'm going to move. I've got a couple of raised hands. I think Susie, if it's okay, I'm going to start with Tony. Tony, why don't you go ahead and jump in? I know you had a follow-up. Perhaps we can respond to that this way.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hi, Tony Nelson with Capo Cares. I'm just a little bit frustrated because it seems like every time I come to these meetings, we have the same conversation. We're having the same meeting over and over. We have the train lobby insisting that the rail line is absolutely essential and is determined to keep dropping boulders and building walls until the beach is gone and the line falls into the shoreline. Meanwhile, most citizens are arguing that there are huge costs to this course of action. First, the huge environmental costs, the loss of pristine beach and habitat. Second, the huge economic costs. We've just been talking about that tourism is the driving economic force in South Orange County. Will they even come when our beaches are gone? And third, the huge and immeasurable cost to the quality of life of citizens, not trains, people. Boulders impede beach access and erode what little coast is left. So millions are impacted by this. It seems that one of the big issues is that the train lobby is working from a fixed and immovable assumption that the train line is essential. I really question that assumption, and I'm asking you to take a look at it. First, only about 2,500 passengers a day are using the San Clemente segment. This is 0.08% of Orange County's population. It's nothing, not even a rounding error. The line shuts down frequently and there's no public outcry. Why? Because no one's on the train. Metrolink plans to truncate service at Irvine for exactly this reason. They only have 500 people a day on it. The military has redundancy built into its system and it uses the line very infrequently. And the only big winner I can see is BNSF, a party that is never present in these meetings for some reason. So none of these trains that are being pushed by BNSF up this line are even stopping along this route to drop off goods. When the line inevitably falls into the sea, they will simply ship their goods from LA and Long Beach rather than San Diego. It is not essential that they go through here. So I have to ask, why are none of our leaders or agencies willing to take a hard look and do an honest cost-benefit analysis on trains versus beaches? This is what we really want to see. I think everyone here knows that these efforts are aimed at life support for this train line only. I suspect you'll all decide the train line wasn't essential after all when it inevitably succumbs to the forces of nature. And I don't think that'll be in 30 years. I think that will be much sooner. The sad thing about that is that we'll have tons and tons of boulders and lots of walls, but no beach left. So I'm asking our leaders and OCTA to be brave, take a good hard look at your essential paradigm, because I think you're really not looking at things clearly here. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Rebecca, would you like to comment on that?
Sure, thank you. So just wanted to just respond as far as so I guess just as a brief reminder, the purpose and need of this particular study is to protect and stabilize a railroad in place for up to the next 30 years. You know, by then, in theory, the longer term solutions, the study will have been completed and will have been underway. So I guess there's a couple of things, right, to just the primary objective of the study is to ensure that we at least protect it up until that point. And by then, longer term solutions will hopefully be underway. That being said, the determining the overall need or how essential the segment of rail is not part of this study. It's not part of the analysis. So we will definitely take note of your comment, but for the purpose of this study, it's to see what we can do to protect the railroad in place until those longer term solutions can be implemented.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it, Rebecca. I'm going to go back to the Q&A really quick, and then Susie, I'm going to come ask you to unmute yourself. Ray says, so you don't know what the sand is going to look like. If you're talking about the sand ultimately that is placed on North Beach, there is a pretty rigorous process for that sand to be evaluated and approved. Again, that's not part of this conversation of the study. I will direct you to the website again, and you're welcome to give us an email, and we'll make sure that we keep you on our list of recipients for when we provide updates about the emergency rail projects, including placement of sand and evaluation of that. Thanks. And Susie, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. You're asking people to give you feedback on this program, and all they're seeing is words on a screen, and the words don't really give an idea of what you're actually asking to construct on our beaches. And so based upon your current application to the Coastal Commission, what you are trying to do is build either a rock revetment that extends 60 feet out from the center line of the railroad, or a vertical pile seawall that would extend about 40 feet out from the railroad. And this is basically taking up all of the usable sand on our beach and occupying the most important real estate that we have in San Clemente. What we are asking as Save Our Beaches San Clemente is that the smallest possible footprint of the armoring be used. We understand that you need to structurally support your tracks, but you don't need 60 feet of rock, and you don't need for the seawall to be 40 feet out in front of the tracks. Your diagrams indicate that the seawall can be built only 15 feet out from the tracks, and that the necessary revetment is only 30 feet out from the tracks. And so we're asking you to restrict yourselves to the minimum destruction of our beaches, and that for the short term, as you call 30 years, which is actually a generation, it's not a short to medium term, that you maintain a beach in front of that for as long as the armoring remains. And you'll do yourself a favor by minimizing the footprint of these structures, because then it's going to make it easier to maintain a beach. And the 30-foot width of the engineered revetment is probably going to be better for you than the vertical seawall, even with the reduced footprint, because the vertical seawall will create more turbulence and more erosion and more destruction of our beaches. And I would also really like to ask that the sand be first on this process before you run out of money, because if you're building that seawall, it's going to cost a lot of money, and you're going to run out of your $300 million and have $0 left for sand. And I really kind of oppose the idea of you relying upon the citizens of San Clemente to pay for the sand and to put on the beaches to support your tracks, and that you're kind of taking credit for that, that other taxpayers, including the taxpayers of San Clemente, we're the ones who are supporting the sand replenishment right now. And we are the ones supporting your tracks. And I think that we should get some credit for that. As you mentioned, what we want is to preserve our access and our recreational value and the environmental value of what is rapidly becoming an endangered habitat, which is our sandy beaches.
Thanks, Susie. So we appreciate the comments. I think one of the difficulties we have is there's a bit of a conflation of the emergency projects and the study. And we want to be clear that we do have these emergency projects. We talked about 540,000 cubic yards of sand being placed. We talked about the funds for that are in that 300 million that you talked about. And so that's already a part of the plan. That's important. The other thing I would say is that, as we've mentioned before, and what we want to keep doing is maximizing the sand and minimizing the structure, right? That's our objective. And you can see that as part of the emergency projects, we're doing that, right? You know, if you look at the total material we're talking about, it's 95% sand and a 5% structure, 5% rock. So we hear you loud and clear, and we appreciate the comments. Ms. Gant, go ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
We
can.
can hear you.
Okay. The community has repeatedly, and experts in oceanic and environmental engineering and similar disciplines have shared repeatedly the best solution. And the best solution is sand replenishment combined with possibly sand retention strategies. And the community has made it clear we do not want excessive and destructive armoring on our beaches. Yet here we are talking about how you want to drop more boulders and add a seawall to our beaches, and especially to our beloved state beach. Our state beach has dunes and it has habitat, and you will destroy that if you put boulders there. Your proposal is quite vague and it's hard to respond to it because we don't know how high or how wide or how long or your armoring is going to be and how far you're going to intrude upon our beaches. Are there environmental experts being consulted, and how can you be better stewards to our community beach? I realize your primary focus is keeping the rail going, but at the same time, this community wants their beaches. And how do you plan to protect our community beaches while also protecting our railway?
Thank you, Ms. Gant. So I want to emphasize again that the purpose and need of the study is to maintain the railroad for up to the next 30 years. And simultaneously, there's a study, or maybe not simultaneously, but to some degree concurrently, there's going to be a study to look at what the long-term options are. And that includes relocating the rail line. So we appreciate that your objective is to protect the beach and expand the beach. We are supportive of that in as much as sand beach nourishment is a part of every solution that we've carried forward. But we really have a responsibility with the study to stay focused on the purpose and need, right? Maintaining the rail line for the next 30 years. I'm going to come back to the Q&A. Ray, you had followed up, and I apologize. You'd said we've had sand dumped in North Beach several times. It's a matter of a time before the ocean takes it away. It seems that sand replacement needs to happen on a regular basis if we're to keep the beach we now have. I don't see how one dump can change things for long. Thank you for the comment. Again, just want to reiterate that the purpose of the study, the purpose and need is to stabilize, maintain the railroad for the next 30 years. Elizabeth Taylor, Ms. Taylor is asking, will OCTA commit to performing full environmental review before placing any riprap? I'm going to hand that question off to Rebecca at this point.
Sure, thank you. So in regards to full environmental review, ultimately the environmental review and approval process will ultimately come down to CEQA NEPA requirements. And so ultimately we will have to comply with whatever the level of environmental analysis is required by those entities. So at this time, we can't say that we commit because this is very much a feasibility level. The level of environmental review and approval would be determined at a later date, at such time when these projects would be moving forward for implementation.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Anna Devers leaves a comment that SANDAG has been involved in this study as a stakeholder and wants to thank staff for providing this update today. Thank you, Anna, for recognizing that. We appreciate that you support the work that we're conducting to keep the rail line in operation for both passengers and goods movement. In addition to all the emergency repair work that we've been doing, OCTA's near and midterm solutions and Caltrans's long-term efforts will ensure that San Diego's only rail line connection is safe and reliable. And I appreciate those comments. And again, I'm going to read another couple of comments here, but I need to reiterate the purpose and need of the study, right? And that is to maintain the rail line. Lori Hedrick says that I am in total agreement with Tony and Susie. They are addressing the main concerns of the community regarding the rail on the coastline. From what you have presented tonight, it doesn't sound like you are listening to our concerns and feedback from the community. And I appreciate the comment. I would counter that, though, with the fact that we did hear that more investigation of sand and sand replenishment was requested. And we now have solutions being carried forward for the beach side. All three of those include sand nourishment. Elizabeth says the study does not address the core question of whether the rail line should remain in place, and it does not reflect current coastal science that recognizes the need to avoid hardening our shorelines in light of sea level rise. OCTA and SANDAG need to focus on removing the rail line and restoring our beaches. Our beaches provide much greater economic and ecological value than this rail line. No boulders or seawalls should be placed on our beaches. This is a violation of the Coastal Act and the Public Trust Doctrine, which ensures that the tidelands are protected for recreational and habitat values. Thank you. Appreciate it, Ms. Taylor. I don't know if you'd like to speak to any of that, Rebecca?
Yeah, well, I think once again, we have to remember that the purpose and need of this study is to protect the rail line in place. And while we understand that from the community perspective, the core question and that you're posing here is whether the rail line should remain in place. Ultimately, that type of analysis is not part of this study, and ultimately, it's not for us to determine the how essential that segment of the rail line is at this time. So again, we are focusing on the rail line is there. It's in operations, and we need to take measures to stabilize and protect it in place to make sure that that rail service can pass through there safely and reliably for both passengers as well as freight goods. And so that is the focus of this study.
Thanks. I think, Rebecca, you may want to take this next one as well. It's a question from Elizabeth about who defines the purpose and need of maintaining the rail line in place for the next 30 years.
Yeah, well, it's so when we first put together the study, part of that process is determining the purpose and need. And so it's the purpose and need is developed as part of that process as we move through this feasibility stage to ultimately determine, again, how we can keep the railroad stabilized and in place. It's there and it's in use. It's one of the second busiest rail corridors in the country. It's also considered a strategic defense line for the military, and so it's there. And we have to figure out, well, it's there, it's going to be used. This study isn't focusing on whether it should be there or who should use it or why or how often or how we could reroute. It's none of that is part of this study. It's there, it's in use by both passengers and freight rail. And so we have to determine what needs to be done to keep it in place while the state takes the lead on figuring out longer term solutions. And at this point, we can't say what those longer term solutions would look like, but we do know that it has to remain in place until such time that that longer term solution is determined.
Thank you, Rebecca. Tony, you're commenting that we cite the purpose and need to keep the rail line in place for 30 years. And why aren't we considering the option of not maintaining the railroad in place for 30 years? Again, why won't you question it and support, if you can, the essential premise of the study? So OCTA is the owner of the rail right of way, right? We have that responsibility. And Metrolink, South Coast Regional Rail, Southern California Regional Rail Authority is the operator there, right? We have an existing rail line. We have existing services as owners of that right of way. We have a responsibility to ensure that we can maintain that rail right of way. The question about the purpose, not the purpose, but the need for the rail line in that location, that is part of that long-term study that Rebecca just mentioned. And, we'll defer to that. We're going to be involved in that, and there will be conversations with the public about that as well, of course. But we have this rail line in place. We have a responsibility to maintain it. And this study is looking at what are the feasible options to do that. And we'll continue forward with that. Ms. Taylor comments that all CEQA and NEPA review must consider the entire low sand corridor and the cumulative impacts, including the environmental impacts in Del Mar. Thank you. Appreciate that, Ms. Taylor. Stuart Moss, one-time sand nourishment, though, correct? That is correct. One-time sand nourishment in combination with some armoring alternatives. Ms. Taylor says, who determines if this rail line is essential, if not OCTA and SANDAG? It's for our portion, again, Ms. Taylor, for our portion of the right of way, it is OCTA. Ms. Nelson notes that we are asking for a new study to focus on the the reason for being of the whole line, the raison d'être. Citizens deserve a solid analysis. Instead, you are steamrolling ahead to destroy our beaches to keep a lightly used rail line in place. This repeated fiction of it being the second busiest rail line in the country has to stop. And this is patently false. It's not even close. Please provide data to support that statement. Appreciate that comment. I don't think we're going to have data to provide you right here in this forum at this point, but I believe we do have that information available. Rebecca, I don't know if you'd like to add to that in any way.
No, I mean, I think that what you stated is accurate, Chris. I mean, we don't have the data on hand, but we do have it available, and that's something that we can follow up on if necessary.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor says, who determined that it must remain in place for 30 years? So in the development of the purpose and need, that's where we determine that, right? And it's also in consultation with our partners along the rail line. It's in consultation with with the state, and an understanding of there being a long-term study as well. Ms. Nelson again, OCTA has an existing rail line. Citizens have an existing beach for now. When will the citizens' needs be considered? Why does OCTA trump millions of citizens and their beach environment? And I don't think that's the case. As mentioned, our effort is to include sand nourishment at its maximum and armoring at its minimum. Really maximizing sand nourishment and minimizing structure to ensure the stabilization of the rail line. So I believe that we are considering the needs of the citizens of San Clemente and others who visit the beach. I appreciate that comment, though. Ms. Taylor, again, I appreciate these comments. We're going to capture all of them. It looks like we're going back and forth on these. So we'll capture these next couple of comments from Ms. Taylor and Ms. Nelson. Susie has a question. What will happen if OCTA runs out of money to place the sand? So I don't have any indication of that. The sand I believe you're speaking of is the sand that OCTA committed to, 540,000 cubic yards of sand as part of the emergency projects. We remain committed to that. So appreciate that comment, but we remain committed to it. All right. Let's see if there are any raised hands. We do. Ms. Whitelaw, would you like to speak beyond the comments you made earlier?
Thanks, Chris. I'd like to respond to your response to my comment and talking about the quantity of sand versus rock, and that the quantity of sand is larger than the quantity of rock. And that's one way of looking at it. But with a beach is real estate. And we don't really look at things volumetrically. There's no volume of a beach. And so what we really need to look at is the area. The amount of riprap that you're proposing to put on State Beach would cover a width of 50 feet, and I believe on about a mile. And so that's a lot of area of good, solid beach that is going to be covered up. The amount of sand that you're proposing to put in front of that would also potentially, if you're really lucky, create 50 feet of beach out in front of the rock. And so on an area by area basis, it's kind of equal. The problem I have with that is that the rock is covering up really hard, indurated compacted sand that's been there for thousands of years, and it's harder to erode. And now you're going to try to create a 50 feet of beach in front of that to replace the 50 feet of beach that you just covered up with loose, unconsolidated. We've seen that sand that comes out of the dredge. It's basically like a milkshake. You're going to put loose, unconsolidated sand out in what is now the surf zone, right in front of those rocks. And that's going to be really difficult to actually be successful at creating that beach. And so I would really prefer that you talk about areas of beach instead of volumes, because that just, it doesn't make sense. It sounds really good, but what we care about is the towel space and the area that we have on the beach, and not some quantity of sand. It's just the fact of physics that you need more sand to create that beach, because you're trying to create it now on it's not a flat area anymore, it's a slanted area, and you've got more volume that you have to fill up than to recreate that area, and that's why the volume of sand has to be more than the rocks. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. We appreciate that comment. I want to reiterate that the sand you're discussing and mentioning is not a part of this study. It's a part of the emergency rail projects. But the people involved in that project are listening in as well. So we'll make sure that I follow up with them and convey that message. We have another question in the Q&A from Stuart Moss. When will you know the size, width, and distance from the rail line of the physical barrier that's envisioned? You're talking about what we've just discussed, Mr. Moss, in the alternatives. If so, I'll hand this off to George, perhaps, to provide a little bit of information about the process. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So at this time in this feasibility study, we won't be able to get into all of those details. The idea is to be able to dwindle down to a manageable amount of alternatives that we could move forward with. So from these refined alternative concepts, after the study is complete, it would then go to a future alternatives analysis phase that would then go to environmental clearance and preliminary engineering, go through all of the environmental regulatory requirements, and then go into final design. And so all of those other subsequent phases come along with all of the public input that will be required during those times as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate that, George. All right. Ms. Gant has left a comment talking about the wide sandy beach that's protected the rail line, protected the rail for over 100 years. We know the solution is a wide sandy beach. We appreciate that point of view. You obviously do not like that solution. Sand replenishment and retention are the solution. Armoring with boulders has destroyed Cypress Shore Beach. It used to be a path between the northern beach and trestles. It is now a wasteland of sharp, dangerous boulders that kids climb on a daily basis. That beach will not return with the boulders you dump there. We lost that beach. How will you avoid this at our state beach? How will you mitigate the loss of beach at Cypress Shore? Why should we trust you? I think, again, I would say that it's important that we separate the two, right? Neither Cypress Shore or sand at the state beach is part of the study, right? So those are separate questions that we're happy to talk further about, but offline. And I think I'll just leave it at that. Mr. Hedrick, says, do your designs anticipate having to move extremely heavy $3.6 million pounds of nuclear waste on these aging rails? They hardly seem reliable now for such an important task. Perhaps we should be focused on a permanent, safer inland route while we look for a permanent disposal site. Appreciate the comments about that, Mr. Hedrick. Thank you. I don't know that there's I don't know, George, do we have an accounting of that, if you will, in anticipation of that in the study details?
So yeah, so that
I can't hear you, George.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the transporting of heavy materials, be they nuclear or any other kind of materials, usually goes through Metrolink. They receive what is called a high, wide, and heavy load requests from various entities that want to transport materials on their line, and Metrolink's engineers go through that analysis. And they'll make that determination if they could carry that kind of load. So no, that's something that typically doesn't get resolved in a study like this. It is handled by the operator, by Metrolink.
There we go. Thank you. Appreciate that. Ms. Whitelaw, could you clarify for the currently planned emergency projects, you are proposing to spend around 100 million to build an engineered revetment on State Beach. If this study shows that that was not the right measure, will OCTA then remove that 100 million of riprap? George or Rebecca, I think I would hand that off to you.
George, I can just kind of start, and then if you want to get into the technical details, that's up to you. But so just to clarify again, because there's the emergency projects are a separate effort. So the concepts coming out of this study are not intended to be used as an evaluation, for lack of a better word, of the emergency response work that we have had to do for those areas that are at imminent risk of further destabilization. So I want to make that clear. So what's coming out of the study isn't meant to say, okay, well, out of this study, these are the concepts that are going to be moving forward. So the steps that have been taken up to this point are incorrect. The steps that have been taken as emergency measures were taken because of the imminent threat down there, which is, again, a separate effort from what this study aims to do, which is to protect the remaining segments of, or the remaining sections of that rail segment in place. And then George, if you'd like to add to it.
Yeah, I think Rebecca, you said it well there. Anything that is being addressed currently with current efforts on areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, already has a design criteria that then when you look at this study looks at beyond those projects, what is needed to be done across the entire corridor. So from this study's perspective, those areas are already protected. And if you look then at the typical sections that they might fall in, and then the refined alternative concepts applicable to that typical section, you will then look at if there are vulnerabilities within that particular typical section, then you have a refined number of alternatives that you could apply. So in the cases of area 1, 2, 3, 4, those would have already been addressed, pre-study. Therefore, that area is not considered, vulnerable anymore. So the second thing that I would say is if you look at the refined alternative concepts, I think they still fall within the same kind of alternatives that are actually being implemented right now. So I don't see there would be any conflicting or conflicts with the solutions being proposed.
Excellent. Thank you, George. Much appreciated. Sorry, a little trouble with the video there. My apologies. Um, we have a similar question or sort of a related question from Tony Nelson, and then I'll come back to you, Ray. And Tony is asking, when the rail line inevitably fails, will OCTA remove all the boulders and walls? And again, I just want to emphasize that that's not part of the study. Also, it's going to be, that's something that is more on the side of speculation at this point. It's not really something that we can comment on. But appreciate the input as always, Tony. Ray Harju says, it seems that all the plans going forward start with sand nourishment. So clearly sand replenishment is part of this project. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. And yes, that is correct. Sand nourishment is a part of the alternatives that we're being studied, a part of the alternatives that we have seen as feasible and can move forward with. And remembering there are three types of areas we're looking at. We're looking at bluff side, stabilization of the rail bed, and then beach side, right? So sand nourishment is a component of that. Ray goes on to say, if I'm reading the room, it sounds like we might be a lot more interested in having a beach rather than watching 2,500 people a day move through San Clemente on the train. Yet it seems that we have an understanding of how to protect the train, but not how to protect the sandy beach. I come back again, Ray, to the purpose and need of the study, which is to determine how best to maintain the rail line for the next 10 to 30 years. Michelle Sinning, I'm wondering about the timeline for the 30-year solution versus the ultimate long-term solution of relocating the line. I know it's a separate study, but I'm wondering why we are considering temporary projects that may have significant impacts rather than ripping off the Band-Aid and funneling more resources into the relocation study. Why isn't this a single feasibility study so we can compare all the alternatives, including relocating the line? This would give the public more opportunity to advocate with elected officials for solutions that will ultimately be best for the community, no matter the financial impact. Does it exceed the timeline for feasibility for study? And apologies if you've answered this already, but I've been trying to form my question and listen. I appreciate that, Ms. Sinning. I'll ask Rebecca to probably take this one. I think that it's important to note that we are responsible for this rail line ultimately, right? It's OCTA owns the right of way, the rail right of way in this area, and throughout other areas in Orange County. So we have a responsibility to maintain it. We're looking out for a time frame that we can work within, and there are additional partners throughout the corridor, the Lausanne corridor, that need to be involved in discussions about sort of the long term and any kind of relocation. But we have this responsibility at this point to really focus on what can we do in the short term, what can we do in the midterm, because we know that the long-term study is going to be a lengthy process, and we want to be able to take action immediately to protect the rail line and not end up in emergency positions again, right, where we're having to cut off passenger service, et cetera, to fix things. So I hope that answers the question. I don't know, Rebecca, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, just I can comment on kind of like the timeline and why we're not doing it all together. So essentially, okay, so essentially, even if we were to address all of those issues in a single study, for as far as the longer term solutions, and again, that will ultimately be led by the state, so I don't want to presume what any of those outcomes or recommendations of that study would be, but just as an example, let's just say that at some point it's decided that the rail line needs to be relocated inland somewhere, for instance. That the process to relocate that line would take years because of all of it is a very complicated and very involved process with a lot of moving parts, permitting, environmental review, all sorts of things. It would take a long time. So even if we were to identify long-term solutions as part of the study, which we're not, but either way, a midterm solution would still be necessary to protect the railroad in place while those longer term solutions and the work involved in that would be underway. So even if we knew today that we needed to move the rail line somewhere else, it would take a long time to get to that point. And in the meantime, we can't continuously have these emergency actions or these emergencies come up that potentially jeopardize the safety of the passengers and freight movement that happens in there. So either way, a short to midterm solution would be necessary regardless of when those longer term solutions actually take place or are implemented. So I hope that that helps kind of clear some of that up.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you for the question and the comments, Ms. Sinning. Susie Whitelaw again. Susie says, so we're moving ahead with the project to build either a 60-foot wide rock revetment or a vertical seawall 40 feet out from the railroad on state beach with no public input. You have specifically stated that you are not accepting public input on that project, right? This public input is for additional projects beyond what you have already submitted to the Coastal Commission. I think what I'm saying is that the area you're talking about is, again, part of the emergency projects. That's altogether separate. And I believe we've gone through many meetings to take input on that. But what we're focused on tonight is the coastal rail resiliency study. So feel free to email me, Susie, and we can further respond to your question. Tony says, to my knowledge, the long-term study has not started. Can you confirm that? Yes, we can confirm that. It has not started yet. We'll be working with partners. OCTA is not leading that study, so but we will be ensuring that the community is well aware of it when it starts. Eric Anderson, is the total amount of sand OCTA is committing to limited to 500,000 cubic yards? Again, I'm going to actually say that this conversation and this webinar is focused on the coastal rail resiliency study and the alternatives that we have refined and are moving forward with and in terms of feasible alternatives to maintain the rail line and as is stated in the purpose of need for the study. So the sand conversation is completely separate. There is more information that we have online about the sand, including our Q&A that addresses the amount. And I would direct you to there. Maybe we can put that in the chat. I think that would be best. Ms. Taylor is asking, has OCTA studied the impacts to Cypress Shore Beach since the placement of boulders in 2021, 2022? This should be evaluated before any additional riprap or seawall is considered. You seem to be saying that you are okay with destroying the beaches because the rail line must be protected at all costs. Is this true? I appreciate the comments. It's not what we're saying. We're saying that we have a responsibility to do it. I wouldn't say it's at all costs. Again, beach nourishment is a part of this. We understand that's an important element for the community, and it's something that we are carrying forward further into the discussion. The Cypress Shore Beach area is not a part of this study, so I'm not going to be able to respond to that. But again, focused on the feasible options for the short to midterm. Susie Whitelaw, could you provide the dates of previous public meetings that address the current Coastal Commission CDP for Area 4? Again, please clarify that all of these listening sessions are not intended to give input on the current CDP for Area 4. I'm not really sure what you're asking about, Ms. Whitelaw. I know we had listening sessions that were related to our initial assessment portion of this study. That broke off, that became an offshoot onto the emergency rail projects. All of the information we have with respect to that has been posted on the website. We will get that URL for you and others, and you can take a look there. If you still have additional questions, please feel free to send me an email. And then Ms. Taylor, rail service can be stopped today and alternative modes such as shuttles can be implemented immediately. It is disingenuous to claim that the rail line must be protected at all costs. Feasible transportation alternatives exist. Alternative beaches do not. I appreciate that comment. I think it's you have some valid points about transportation alternatives. We do actually we're working on our long-range transportation plan, and there are opportunities to provide input about that. So you know, I would recommend you take that opportunity. It's easy to do that. We have a website dedicated to that. It's octa.net/LRTP. And I think you can go on there and find opportunities to provide comments about feasible alternatives, transportation alternatives. Gary Walsh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I need to come back to the list of attendees. Gary's got his hand raised, and then Lisa Gant has her hand raised. Gary Walsh, please go ahead. Gary, I don't think I'm not hearing you. Are others?
I can't hear either, Chris.
Gary, would you like to write or type your comment into the Q&A? While we're working that out, I'm going to move to Susie wrote, and I'll get to you in just a moment, Ms. Gant. Susie wrote that we keep saying that this meeting is not intended to address the current CDP for Area 4. That is correct. It is not. This meeting is to address the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study, feasible alternatives that we've been discussing. We discussed this same study back in July. We had some previous meetings, listening sessions, as you mentioned, and that out of those meetings did come comment regarding what turned out to be these emergency projects, right? So this meeting is not about that. If you have additional comments regarding the CDP for Area 4, again, feel free to email me. But no, this meeting isn't about that. So appreciate that. Lisa Gant, do you want to go ahead?
I didn't have my hand up, but I do have a question. It seems like you were working parallel with the community and the city. The city's trying to get sand nourishment and sand retention devices to help retain our beaches. And it seems like there should be maybe more cooperation between the city and the railway in terms of getting sand replenishment on a regular basis on our beaches, and talking about how you could help cooperate in sand retention strategies, which seems to have been taken off of your list.
So I know we are working closely with the city. I don't know, George, if you remember your team, wants to discuss that, or Rebecca. We are working closely with the city on their efforts and trying to partner with them in a couple of areas. But so it's definitely not something that is we're not ignoring them. We're not keeping them out of the loop. It's nothing like that. We're all very closely tied when it comes to both the emergency projects that are ongoing currently and this feasibility study. Mr. Walsh, do you want to try again? You're unmuted. Mr. Walsh, I don't know if you can hear us. All right, sorry about that. Perhaps you can write your comment or question in the Q&A. Speaking of which, Mr. Stuart Moss, will the evaluation of beachside options include an assessment of how any of the options have panned out, good or bad, in the past? I think that's a great question, George, for you and your team.
Yeah, so I would say that that would generally be considered under, either the design criteria that we need to meet for that alternative. You won't necessarily see a sub criteria exactly like the way that the question was worded, but it actually falls under many different categories. It's going to be everything from its constructability, its longevity, its impact. So all of that, I would say, is considered in the various evaluation criteria.
Thank you, George. Susie Whitelaw writes that the current CDP, that's Coastal Development Permit for those who don't know, for Area 4. Area 4 is one of the 4 project areas that came out of the initial assessment early on in this study. Is not an emergency project. The Coastal Commission denied the emergency permit as no emergency exists there. Yes, you're absolutely correct. What I was referring to, though, was the projects that came out of that initial assessment, which are still not a part of the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study. So appreciate that. Ms. Gant is asking, why have sand retention strategies been taken off your list of solutions? We'll leave that with the technical team. George, or your team?
Yeah, Russ, do you want to address this comment?
Yes. And we've hit it. The question has come up a couple of times, but I'll kind of rephrase it a little bit. We think that sand retention can be an important element of protecting and maintaining the shoreline to increase the longevity of a beach nourishment project. And we're paying close attention to the work that the city is doing on their study, as well as other studies like in Oceanside, for example. But for this particular study and the purpose and need, in doing a detailed investigation of the ability for sand retention to maintain the beach, didn't pass muster compared to the other alternatives, just due to the time involved, the level of study, the environmental analysis to evaluate the efficacy of the proper sand retention structure, whether it be an artificial reef or something like that, because I think a lot of you are familiar with this, that those have really yet to be proven in terms of their ability to build an artificial, for example, reef, and have it perform in a way that's expected in terms of how much beach sand will it retain? Was it worth the construction dollars to build it? Does it hold that much more sand? There's some concern about nearshore habitat areas already in the area. Would it impact those? There's real concerns about that. So we think it's important for, I think, the region to be looking at sand retention to enhance the viability of beach nourishment projects, but really carefully looking at sand retention just didn't really fit the purpose and need of this 10 to 30 year timeframe study.
Great, thank you, Russ. Much appreciated. Mr. Walsh has got switched microphones, so hopefully this time it works. If we could unmute Gary and then allow him to make his comment or ask his question, and that'll be it for us. We'll be wrapping up for the evening. Are you there, Gary? Well, unfortunately, we still aren't getting you. I just realized I wasn't unmuted. Apologies. We still couldn't get Mr. Walsh. But we are over time on the webinar. So I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps. I do first, though, want to thank everybody for the comments and questions. I think it's a vigorous discussion. This is as it always has been and will continue to be. We appreciate it. If you do have any questions, you'll see my email and Rebecca's email on the next screen. But with respect to next steps, you can see where we are in the process. We've refined the concepts and we're getting feedback. We're sharing that with the public. We anticipate having a draft feasibility report with those concepts sometime next year. We'll have a draft report and we will be coming back to the public to share that. That'll be in spring, summer of next year. And then we expect to have a final report in summer, late summer, and we will present it to the board. So with that, next slide. This is our information, contact information. You can email or call either Rebecca or me with additional questions or comments, and we will be happy to share that with the team and get additional information back to you. Please note that we do have our in-person public meeting tomorrow at San Clemente City Hall, so you're welcome to join us there as well and continue asking these questions. Thank you all very much and hope you have a good evening.